welcome to the NBA Draft.
Do you want a podcast that discusses and breaks down your favorite prospects all the way until they hear their name called on draft night?
Luka Doncic.
Welcome to the home of NBA Draft Prospects.
Words can't describe how I feel right now.
This is the Prospect Pod, presented by Hardwood Hoops Central, only on YouTube.
Fuck who did I offend? Rappers, sit back, I'm about to sit back, sit back, I'm about to begin. Sit back, I'm about sit back, I'm about to begin. Sit back, I'm about to begin.
And welcome to another edition of the Prospect Pod, presented by Hardwood Hoops Central. As usual, as always, I am your host, Stephen Barnhart of Hardwood Hoop Central. Why did we begin that way, Steve? Well, you got the normal intro. I just had to maybe ante up a little bit. Huh? Get the MOP reference there? No, for me, aside from basketball being a big part of my life, hip-hop has always been a big part of my cultural influence and everything else. Obviously, basketball and hip-hop go hand in hand in a lot of ways and have for a long time. So, I wanted to kind of kick the show off with a little bit of we're about to begin, some scratching and mixing in there by the one and only DJ Premier. A song called The Enemy by the late, great Big L. If you do not know who that is, I forgive you, but go to Spotify, Apple Music, wherever you get your music, start listening to his catalog. Very controversial figure, left us way too soon, unfortunately. I'll spare you any details in that regard, but yeah, for me, one hell of an MC. So, way I look at it, that's one way to begin. So, with that, wanted to welcome you guys in to another episode of the Prospect Pod. This is part 2 of our Summer League recap, prospect recap. Again, we will be talking 2022 NBA Draft prospects, guys who were drafted, undrafted. We went over, a handful or a number of probably 15 to 20 first-round guys in part 1. If you didn't hear part 1, go to Apple Podcasts or Spotify. It'll be up there. So listen to part 1 before you dive into part 2. But part 2 today, we're going to go over guys, mostly second-round guys, undrafted guys, some first-round guys for sure, just to kind of put a bow on that part of the draft. But before that, I just wanted to go over some summer basketball housekeeping notes. Obviously, summer basketball is near and dear to my heart for all the years I spent traveling the country, watching players nationally, whether it was, the shoe circuits or the different camps that go on during this time of year. I highly recommend poking your head in, watching some of the future of basketball. You're going to see guys who will eventually be first-round picks, all-stars, all sorts of things. I mean, some of the best basketball you can see will be played under one roof over the next several days. Aside from that, obviously we just wrapped up Summer League, NBA Summer League. But also, we've been kicking off the basketball tournament, which has been taking place in different regions, as well as Rucker Park, the famous Rucker Park in New York, as well as what we just saw a few days ago at the Drew, with LeBron being there, and DeMar DeRozan, and of course Kyrie Irving. I'm just kidding. Just kidding. No, I believe he was working a camp with Phil Handy, so jokes aside, obviously he had an obligation there, so would have been nice to see him play, but I think it's equally more important to have an opportunity to inspire young people to see a player up close and personal. And that's what, being able to see LeBron at a place like the Drew, seeing Kyrie at a camp, seeing DeMar DeRozan playing alongside LeBron, in an area that he grew up in, talking about DeMar DeRozan, seeing these guys, do these summertime runs, it's to me, it's the most fun basketball you're going to watch. It dwarfs, in my opinion, anything that you'll watch in the regular season. Obviously, there's some great basketball played in the NBA, but in terms of just overall fun and just, it's literally taking, it's like taking a good song, right, and putting another beat over those lyrics. DJs would call that blending, back in the day when mixtapes were really big, you'd get blend tapes where you'd get lyrics from one song and they'd be blended over another beat. And that's what essentially summertime basketball reminds me of, having LeBron, who's used to playing in these big stages, whether it's MSG, whether it's crypto.com, NFT arena, Staples Center, the whole deal. To get these guys to play in those settings, obviously jokes are going to be made. Oh, you almost lost. And, of course you get people who want to make their comments the typical haters want to come out, as opposed to enjoying something that is a rarity, happens once every 10 plus years. And here we are, trying to figure out ways to shit on it. Those of you who enjoyed it for what it was, congratulations for being able to actually enjoy something that isn't a requirement of a guy like that. Doesn't need to do it, doesn't need the fanfare. He obviously knows he is loved and hated in the same breath, but regardless, whatever he does, it is captivating to many, polarizing to many. And, for me, I just love seeing how serious he took it. He's foul calls he doesn't agree with. He's making it be known. And, of course, the jokes go that, it doesn't matter what setting he's in, he complains about calls. And that's all well and good. I get Twitter's a place for jokes, and some are funny and some are, just basically cliche and run-of-the-mill bullshit. But, just to see how serious he took it. I'm not saying like he played full game speed or what have you. Obviously, being able to get some game reps, not at NBA speed, but just game reps in terms of shots. You saw some of the shots that, the sidestep three and some of the long fades that he's, been taking more later in his career. Being able to get some of those reps, while also, entertaining the crowd. I mean, a lot was made of Malachi Flynn going for 73 in Jamal Crawford's camp, and then they try to, compare it to what LeBron and DeRozan did, and that becomes another joke in and of itself. But if we're being honest about it, I mean, nobody's checking LeBron at the Drew, and that's nothing against any of those guys. BPE, played a really good game, and man, I was really interested to see if they were going to hit that shot at the end. Not a bad look, all things considered. But overall, man, it was a cool event. Just being able to have that opportunity. And the thing is, there's so many people in that building. I'm sure some probably have some access and privilege to maybe see LeBron up close, but there are many in that building that don't get that opportunity. And to be able to be, a couple hundred feet away, or to share, even if it's just a brief interaction with LeBron, obviously it's a big deal for a lot of people. And that's why you do it, right? I mean, at the end of the day, like, you're not going there for any sort of pat on the back or legacy bump or, hey, he's a man of the people. You go because, number one, you love basketball, you want to get some run in, but at the same point in time, it's a cool atmosphere to do it in. And you know what? It's competitive. It's not NBA basketball. We get that, but at the same point in time, people playing on BPE, people playing on cheaters, all these teams that, are involved in the Drew year in and year out, they give a shit. And it's what you want to see. Regardless of what you think of the basketball compared to, higher level basketball, that's all aside, man. Like, you got to be able to enjoy basketball at all levels. Especially if you say you love this game, you have to be able to enjoy it at all levels. I've seen some really bad basketball played at high levels. I've seen some really bad basketball play at low levels. But at the end of the day, you try to contextualize it for what it is and move on to the next game, in terms of being a viewer and evaluator, whatever your purpose is. But, ultimately, being able to see a LeBron or a DeRozan or any of these guys that have popped through in the Drew in the years, or the Dykeman or Rucker, these different tournaments that have, been historic over the many years of street ball and, even all the way back to the days of And One mixtapes and all that type of stuff. So, look, man, if you have played basketball at all, you started in the parks, you started in the high school gyms, the church gyms, the rec leagues and the YMCAs and, your friend's backyard. I mean, I was the guy that, had all his friends come over and I had the basketball hoop on the back and we all would play for several hours on end and drink gallons and gallons of water, Kool-Aid if needed, whatever. And we just had a good time. And it was just, it's the kind of basketball that, isn't, overly, overly produced, in that you're not running plays. You're just out there to play the game, and use your instincts to, basically be able to have a good time and win a game. So when you can take guys who are used to playing high level, chess and kind of simplify it and just allow them to play, it's pretty cool. To strip it down to its very bare basics. So that was a cool thing to see over the weekend. If you've had a chance to watch any of the basketball tournament, I would highly encourage it. If you haven't, always a really good event year in and year out. I checked in to watch the Thompson twins, two guys who I think definitely should be top 5 picks in the 2023 draft, two guys who I think have the type of two-way potential to be all-stars in the NBA one day. In this 2023 draft, when you talk about, Victor at the top, when you talk about Scoot, when you talk about, Cam, when you talk about the Thompson twins, this top of the draft is for the next upcoming draft is going to be really good, or it could stand to be very good. Much like the one that we've just wrapped up here with the 2022 class, when you think about all the guys who've been drafted even in the top 6. Congratulations to Keegan Murray as a guy who goes number 4 overall, and shoots the hell out of it, scores the hell out of it. And I said on the podcast, a couple episodes ago, that I felt really like NBA spacing as far as all the scorers at the top of this draft. He was going to benefit the most because, he has the tools as a shooter and just as a scorer. But, when you give additional space to guys who are just natural in one way, it just accentuates what they can do and allows them to do what they can do that much better. Just to wrap up the TBT stuff, again, I'd highly encourage it. Definitely make sure you check out the Thompson twins. Two guys who, again, I think have a bright future in the NBA. But even more so for guys who have played overseas, as pros, and had some time in the NBA, who had good college careers, maybe even better than good, playing together. Kind of under their alma mater, whether it be in Oregon, whether it be a Creighton, whether it be in Arkansas, et cetera, et cetera. And just being able to kind of see these guys and these names that maybe you haven't seen in a while if you don't really follow some of them beyond college. So it's always a cool event. And to me, as much as we don't enjoy the dog days of summer, which we're currently in, to me, to get these summertime runs, to get this summertime basketball is always a treat. And I'm somebody who, I'll be honest with you, I think I enjoy Summer League more than I do a lot of NBA regular season. And that's not to do the cliche thing of let's downplay regular season NBA basketball. It's more so being able to see guys you haven't seen, seeing guys get an opportunity, seeing rookies obviously get their first kind of, NBA action. And yes, I understand it's just Summer League. Yeah, I got that. But still, just to be able to see them kind of in that environment, you know, I don't know. It's summertime basketball to me is probably the most fun time for basketball for me. When you talk about all the different levels that are going on, whether it's TBT, whether it's runs like the Drew, whether it's the AAU circuits and all that and everything that goes on there, it's a really fun time. So hopefully you're getting a chance to check some of that out. If you haven't, or if you haven't been, I highly recommend it. TBT seems to be going on, somewhat regularly. So check ESPN or whatever listings you have there to see what games are coming up, and definitely check in because it's a lot of fun. All right, that really has to do with catching us up from the last episode as far as basketball and whatnot. Let's just go ahead and jump in on some of my thoughts and analysis on. I'll probably go, let's see, maybe 19 guys on this one. I think that's the count I have here. And this is in no particular order. If you listen to part one, it wasn't in any particular order. It didn't go by draft order. It didn't go by ranking. It didn't go by who I was most impressed by or anything like that. It's just, a list of guys and my thoughts on them, how they looked or how they've looked and kind of their fit and upside and those sort of things. So we'll do the same sort of thing here. Again, this is all 2022 NBA draft class guys. A lot of these guys are going to either be, a smattering of maybe some first round guys, but mostly second and undrafted. So as you're listening, if you don't hear any a particular name that you think I should have talked about, go to part one before you really leave any sort of comments or reach out to me on Twitter, because I can almost guarantee you by the end of this, I will have covered most names of guys who stood out within the 2022 draft class at Summer League in some way or another. All right, so let's start it off. And again, I'm not going to go in any kind of order. I'm just going to go on how I took my notes. I'm going to start off with MarJon Beauchamp, a guy that dating back to his time in high school when I first started getting a chance to see him, I really thought highly of. I'm talking about a guy who's a long wing, who has put the stamp on himself as the role of a 3-and-D guy. And I thought he did a good job in Summer League showcasing a good bit of that. Obviously, knees get a little bit stronger. There were times, playing through contact where that certainly could have helped, but he was still relatively good around the rim. I thought he was good in catch and shoot and can continue to be on that level of a good 3-and-D guy. You'd like to see him continue to evolve as a passer and decision maker. I think by the end of Summer League, he was averaging somewhere around 1 assist to 2 turnovers, and I might have missed a game where I didn't, take in the full count, but it's somewhere close to 1 assist and 2 turnovers. But there's opportunities there for him to to continue to get better in that way, and I think he can. But ultimately, he knows his role, and I think we all kind of know his role if you watch him enough. Guy that's going to lock in defensively, and you want to be able to see him hit threes at a reasonable clip and continue to evolve from there. So I thought he did himself solid favors playing well the way he did it at Summer League. So I expected him to play well to a degree, and he did. So it's good to get some of that confirmation, but to be able to see that first stepping stone for MarJon take place. And if you know anything about his story, it's even more inspiring to kind of see what he's doing now. So we'll go on from MarJon over to Dominic Barlow. Listen, I think Dominic, first of all, if I'm not mistaken, he earned a two-way spot with San Antonio, which is well-deserved. I think he's a guy that if you put him in the G League and allow him to have some time to marinate, you can potentially start to unlock some of the things that you saw in flashes in Summer League. He'd show you some of the handle, being able to spin off a guy and finish at the rim, showed some solid switching ability and being able to slide, can grab and go a little bit. Obviously, as most guys who are coming from the level he was coming from, the high school prep level, strength's going to be needed and whatnot. But, ultimately, I think he showed enough flashes to earn the two-way contract. And I've got here in my notes that he got his two-way contract offer on July 11th. So basically a week ago today. We're recording this on July 18th. And so, good for him. Obviously I'd like to see him, become more physical. I think the flashes in which he attacked off the bounce and got to the rim were encouraging. Some of the finishing, left something to be desired there. His handle, to me, tended to be a little too predictable, a little too loose at times. But I like overall just his aggression, and he's checked in mentally into the game. Like, he's trying to play the game the way he knows how. He doesn't really he's not playing out of his own character, trying to do something he's not capable of. He's showing you his game. And I think there's a lot of opportunity in a setting like Summer League to try to do something that you're not capable of, or show a part of yourself that isn't NBA level. Some guys want to try to show you their range, and they're not rangy shooters. Some guys want to, try to score in ways in which is not natural to them as far as what their skill set is. For Dominic, there's a lot of raw skill. There's definitely a lot of room to be polished, but you could see where time in the G League and further coaching and skill development will potentially, see a guy that could, make a roster down the road. So it was very encouraging to see what he was able to do. All right, let's switch over to Ousmane Dieng, Oklahoma City. A lot was made of him coming into the draft as a young prospect from overseas. Just a lot of raw skill, but he shows a lot of pace and polish and touch and feel. He knows what he wants to do. It's just about putting it together at this level and really executing at a higher frequency and speed than what he's used to. But if you go to the tape, especially the film that we've put up on our YouTube channel, you can see some of that. You can definitely see enough of it there to where if you compare it to what you saw him doing in Summer League to some degree, you can see, the flashes where it eventually could evolve to if you look at more of some of the full game film from him playing overseas. Obviously strength and reps are obviously needed for someone with his body type. NBA range is there. It's not, he's not a knockdown shooter right now. He's a little more streaky, but he's comfortable with range. I think he's comfortable with NBA range. It's definitely there. The footwork's on pace, on drives. Like he has some good footwork there to be able to do some Euro steps and really just try to allow himself to create space enough to, get whatever shot he's looking to get off. Ultimately what you see him doing, with the NBL, there's a lot of confidence and reps there, going in and prior to. That same thing's going to need to be done in the NBA for, some of the more raw skill that you see to really shine through. But I think he's a guy that has a smooth stroke, smooth jump shot, off the catch or off the dribble. I just think with a guy like that, it's just really going to need time. But obviously that's a complete upside pick to see what he can potentially evolve into. And so we'll see. It was certainly encouraging in some spots. In other spots, you had to kind of go back to some of his previous film to kind of remind you of what it could look like down the road. So I would encourage you to do that, as you think back to maybe any of the Summer League games you watched him play. I would encourage you to go to our YouTube channel and look at some of the film that's on him from previous and kind of see where he could evolve into. So that the excitement that some people have for him, maybe you can share on that to some degree. All right, let's move on from Ousmane over to Benedict Mathurin. And look, let me tell you something. I don't know if I mentioned him in the last podcast. If I did, count this as just somebody who's excited for what he could be down the road. Mentioning him again. I don't think I mentioned him in the first podcast. But if I did, excuse me. He didn't finish out Summer League. And forget if it was an ankle injury or something, but something that, eventually the Pacers are like, look, we've seen enough. No problem. And that's going to happen. I thought he played well. Look, we're talking about a guy who, and Benedict is more of a volume shooter, pull-up jump shooter, creating shots off the dribble, shoots, threes in volume as you see from wings and guards these days. And I thought he hit at a really, a really good level. Was getting to the rim, showing his athleticism, just has that dog in him that you want from a wing scorer and a guy who's just going to come in confident and be willing to make plays and not be afraid of the moment, afraid of the stage. I think he's got a lot of that in him. I was high on him while he was at watching film at Arizona. Excuse me. But to see it kind of play out, on the summer league stage is a nice, again, first step. And look, I mean, this is a team in Indiana that's going to need, as much scoring help as they can muster between, what they lost in Sabonis. Malcolm Brogdon's no longer there. He's, obviously with Boston now. There's opportunity there for Benedict to come in and really make an impact scoring-wise year one. And, I fully expect that he'll be, one of the top vote getters when it comes to voting for Rookie of the Year. What does that mean long term? I mean, it's a 1-year award. It is what it is. But, when you think about the history of what that award's been, it's pretty much, who's got the highest scoring average for the most part. And I certainly think he'll have the opportunity to have a good average his first year in terms of scoring the ball. I think Keegan Murray, Paolo, same kind of thing. So there are going to be some rookies at the top. They're going to have, some really good first-year opportunities. I think Benedict is among them. So I'm really excited to see how things are going to kind of play out for him. But I'm really high on his immediate and long-term future. All right, Jaden Hardy. Obviously he had the 28-point game to start out the summer league, and everybody was really excited. It was encouraging to see. You see the footwork, you see the natural scoring ability, the things that made him kind of the talk of, the lottery for this draft early on when you saw what he was doing in high school. But eventually, he makes his way over to the G League. Doesn't necessarily have the season that people were hoping for out of a guy who was being projected as, top 10 or even higher pick at one point. But, I think ultimately, again, when you look and say, well, what does this guy bring to the table at an NBA level? Jaden Hardy is obviously going to come in as a guy who can score. Now, obviously, I don't suspect that he is going to be getting the sort of touches and the sort of shots that, he needs to be the kind of scorer night in and night out that he wants to be. Look, there's going to be games where he's going to look good and efficient like the first game, and then there's going to be a bunch of games behind it where he takes more shots than he has points. You'll have 15 shots, 13 points, 14 points, and you saw a lot of that. So, while it's encouraging to see what he did game one, you see the footwork, you see the counters, you see, basically, that he's got that feel as a scorer, as a jump shooter, and a driver and those sort of things. That's all well and good, but at the end of the day, a lot of that's going to come back down to earth in some degree. And obviously, as he gets more opportunities down the road in G League and, eventually figures out his role in the NBA, wherever that is, and, whether it definitely is with Dallas, for the long term, or, the next, several years or whatever, ultimately you're looking at him to be a guy that essentially comes off your bench more than likely, especially if it's going to be for a playoff team like Dallas is, and potentially, score in your second unit and whatnot. So, I don't expect a ton out of him right away. I expect to see flashes like we saw. Game one, you saw all the things that were encouraging. You saw the tweet from Christian Wood, he could be the steal of the draft. Thank you for drafting him and this and that. And that's the type of excitement and encouragement people felt and have felt for him for a while. That's why people were high on him at one point. That's why people still believed he should have been a first-round pick. And then you're going to have the games where he looks inefficient and he struggles to score. That's just kind of the nature of the business. If you're labeled as a scorer, that's the nature of the business. And so, again, encouraging first game, and then everything kind of came back down to earth to some degree. And, you know, look, there's enough there for him to evolve, and I think he will. You know, I too, you know, I felt, you know, watching him in high school that he had a really good shot to be, you know, potential top 10 pick. And, you know, obviously, you know, there's a reason it's good when guys can have that buffer between high school and the NBA to a degree, where it's whether it's going to an overtime elite, whether it's going to the G League, whether it's going to a more traditional route to the NBA or NCAA. You know, that buffer is just kind of gives you a sense of what that next level up is, and it gives you that sense not only as him as a player, but it gives you a sense as the viewer or, you know, evaluator or whatever you are. And I think that's needed. That buffer is needed, whatever that buffer is. Again, I'm not suggesting, you know, one route or over another or whatever. Ultimately, though, but you need some sort of reality check of who a guy really is. And that to me is why I like Summer League. There's some reality into it, even though it's not the ultimate reality, but it's still a buffer to give you some sense of where things are with a player or prospect. You know, and I think you saw that with Jaden Hardy, and I think you saw that, you know, with his time in the G League as well. All right, Jalen Duren. You know, look, Jalen, I thought was fantastic, you know, for the most part. We're talking about a guy who shot over 60% from the field. I believe from last I checked, at least for those first 3 games for sure. You know, I mean, there's still opportunities for him to improve on his touch and his footwork around the rim, but obviously he's going to be more of a vertical spacer, a guy who's going to, you know, be able to catch lobs and, you know, all those different things with his athleticism and length. You know, you'd like to see him develop, you know, kind of a go-to jumper at some point that he can kind of hit in the mid-range and, you know, to give him more, you know, to give him more versatility on offense. You saw some of the shots or some of the jump shots he attempted to take. You know, some of it looked all right, but, you know, it's obviously an area where he can continue to evolve. You know, to me, you know, outside of just catching it and flushing it on guys, you know, what are the go-to encounters that he would utilize as a scorer? And that's, you know, part of the footwork that we mentioned. You know, but ultimately, when you look at essentially what he is as a vertical spacer, I mean, he's going to be a hard guy to keep off the front of the rim in terms of when he gets that ball and he goes up. It's, you know, it's watch out below. One of the things I did like about him for sure was there was parts of his game that he looked like a solid passer. Like if you put him in the post, even for example, you know, I thought there were some real flashes there where as a passer he could, you know, do some real positive things that, you know, could add some of that versatility that we mentioned, you know, to his offensive game. You know, it's been said more than enough about his lateral quickness or lack thereof, you know, guarding in space. You know, he's more of a drop big and that sort of thing. So he can certainly improve there. But ultimately, when you boil it down, you know, we're talking about an athletic vertical spacer who's going to be able to block shots, you know, high point the ball, you know, and really attack. So, you know, as I mentioned, I think I might have mentioned this in the last pod. So again, if like Benedict Mathurin, if I mentioned Jalen in the last pod, which I'm pretty sure I did, but I just wanted to touch base with him again in terms of, you know, watching more film and, you know, as far as Summer League went. But you know, I thought by and large, you know, it wasn't very encouraging, just, you know, for what he showed. You know, and again, I think as I mentioned in the last pod too, you know, when you start to add in, you know, Cade into that mix with, you know, some of the passing he can do, Jaden Ivey, you know, you saw some of the stuff Jaden can do as a passer. So I think between those three, there's going to be some real opportunities for lobs and, you know, transition play. And I think they'll all complement each other in different ways. So excited to see what he he evolves into. All right, wanted to quickly mention Ty Washington. Look, Ty, has been kind of this balance of scorer and passer, whether it was high school, whether it was, his time at Kentucky. Obviously, he had the 17 assist game at Kentucky. I thought what he showed in his floater game, getting out in transition and being active in those ways, he had his struggles shooting the ball, but he's done okay, or did okay, attacking off the bounce. Gets out of his dribble, in and out of his dribble pretty quickly, and gets his shot off. Comfortable in the mid-range, off the bounce. His three is obviously going to need time and reps. But, I think there's more to Ty's offense when you consider his passing ability. He can play in the pick and roll, and he finds guys. Some of the things that, you saw from him in the pick and roll, at Kentucky, some of it you got a chance to see in summer league as well. His speed and his passing, can allow him to, get out in the open floor and really make plays. So to me, there's definitely something there. Once he gets himself into a rhythm to where he knows his role and kind of, can grow and evolve in that role, I think what you'll see between him and the mid-range game, playing in the pick and roll, I think, there'll be elements of where he can come off a pick and roll, and score at the nail or at the elbow, but then also operate as a good passer in the pick and roll as well. So to be able to come in and obviously, he can play with a little more speed as well, and really just kind of, run your second unit in that way. So I was encouraged, to some degrees with what he was able to do. All right, so from him to Peyton Watson, got a chance to watch a couple of games from Peyton. Obviously, there was people, including myself, that didn't expect him to be a first-round pick. Obviously, Denver felt differently. Peyton did have a game in which he played really well. I want to forget what the stat line is, but let me pull it up here and can mention it. 2 seconds. Right, so it was his second summer league game on the 10th, where he goes for 19, 7, and 19-7, and I think he added to that a couple steals, a block. He just had a good overall game. You could see the confidence, the athleticism he was able to play with, being able to cross guys up a little bit and try to get to the rim and attack. Three ball was falling in that game too. Or I should not necessarily in that game, but he was getting comfortable taking. He only went to 1 of 4 in that game from 3, but ultimately was getting comfortable taking that shot, rebounding the ball, had 3 offensive rebounds. You saw some of the putback dunks, he's had throughout the throughout the summer league. And you just see the overall athleticism of a young player who obviously is still very raw and trying to put it together, but there's definitely some upside there in terms of what he can do off the bounce, what he can do on the glass, and even some of the defensive playmaking he can do, as a help side defender, as a guy who can get in the passing lanes. Some of these guys, so obviously who are longer, a little more rangy, a little more, obviously more athletic, and get out and create some of those defensive plays that not everybody can create. And again, he just looked comfortable being able to try to create drives off his own dribble. Nothing overly great in terms of his shooting splits. Obviously, that game we mentioned, the 19-point game, goes 8 for 12. But basically, the rest of the way, we're talking about shooting games of 4 of 13, 3 of 14, 1 of 7, and 2 of 11, and never made more than 1 3, in any of the games. So I mean, there's definitely a lot to be desired there. But you like some of the attacking he showed. One of the games, he had 6 free throw attempts, only made 2, so that's obviously not great. But in that game as well, 8 rebounds. I really did like what he was doing on the glass. He kept figuring out ways to kind of stay active. Even if the shot's not falling, he had games where he had 8 rebounds and had 2 other games where he had 7 rebounds. And then those 2 7-rebound games, we're talking about, 3 offensive rebounds. So, decision-making is not always there. Ball handling can get loose. I mean, these are things that as he continues to refine his skill and define his role, that will be kind of ironed out to some degree. But he is a project, but there is that upside there. And if you feel good about his upside, then you probably saw some flashes that you thought were encouraging, but ultimately there's a lot of work to be done here. But certainly in some spots he played above some of the expectations I had for him, because what he produced at UCLA obviously wasn't up to what some people were, I don't want to say expecting. Of course, there are expectations when you're a 5-star prospect and so on and so forth. But ultimately, he's not the first nor the last guy that's ever going to have 5 stars next to his name and go into college year one and maybe not play at the level that some people were expecting. But either way, I thought there were definitely areas where he can certainly improve. We've talked about some of that, but also, again, some of the natural ability he has mixed in with his athleticism. If you look at any draft, there's always going to be a couple guys where the athleticism is like super encouraging, and you see all the flashes of what could be if it's developed correctly. So we'll see. Obviously there's a lot of time ahead for a guy that just enters the league. So I thought there were some really encouraging signs, but ultimately, we'll see how it plays out long term. All right, moving on from Peyton Watson to Christian Koloko. As far as, defensively, as a drop big with a solid, lateral quickness and sliding ability, rim protections there. You could see some of the flashes of him working on his 3 to spread the floor. He took, a few threes, within summer league play. Did a good job with his length of deflecting passes, altering shots. Needs more touch and reps around the rim. But has good pop off the floor to be a vertical spacer, lob target type of guy. Can high point the basketball and get to a point where, he can flush it on guys for sure. There was definitely times where I thought he could definitely set some better and harder screens, when appropriate. Rebounding position, doesn't always look to establish the best position and, go up for the ball. And, there were some games where his rebounding was a little bit better in spots than others. It's a little bit too easy to box him out, I thought, but, overall, like a lot of these guys, it's a lot of little flashes. But, I think for me, some of the things you saw in terms of rim protection, ball deflections, defensively, there was some real upside there. And we'll see how his offensive game evolves. Again, with his archetype right now, you probably more expect him to be a vertical spacer. But again, he showed couple flashes of working on his 3-point game, so we'll see how his jump shot evolves and where he's able to, essentially get comfortable, potentially taking shots away from the paint. Overall, again, guy I thought that was encouraging. All right, so let's go from him to Darius Days. I want to look something up because I haven't followed up on this myself. Let me see. Hold on before I go to speak on Darius. Let's see. Okay. That's great. All right, so just 2 days ago, and I didn't catch wind of this, which is a shame on my part, the Miami Heat have signed Darius Days and guard Marcus Garrett to 2-way contracts. Marcus obviously known more as a defender, which obviously fits that Heat culture. Darius, great for him. I mean, he went to high school here in Florida. to be able to sign with the Heat. Obviously he's gonna find that their G League team is not exactly in Florida. I'll let you Google where their where their G League team is located, but let's just say he's in for some cold temperatures. But that's a cool opportunity. A kid who made his name in game, at the high school level in Florida, to be able to eventually sign with an NBA team based in Florida, at least the home team anyway. That's pretty cool. And look, I thought, Darius was one of these guys who, went through kind of the full gamut of the draft process, from Portsmouth to the Combine, into the Summer League, and I remember watching him, as a young kid coming through high school. I mean, he was more, of an athlete, an above the rim kind of, big, strong athlete. And then he eventually developed some more of the skill with the handle, and over time became, capable and more capable of shooting three. And I thought he really showcased that, that confidence to really just be able to pull the trigger and spread the floor. Did a good job on the glass. Ultimately, better athlete than one might assume from just looking at him. Bit streaky of a shooter, but one thing that Darius doesn't lack and has never lacked in is confidence, and he has continued to just make strides in his game, and it's great to see that he's going to get that opportunity with the Heat. And so I'm looking forward to see what he'll do in the G League and kind of beyond. It's a really cool opportunity. I wasn't aware of that till just now. So look at that. You do a podcast and you learn something. That's why you got to do more of them, Steve. All right. So we'll go from Darius to a guy who, I think really opened a lot of eyes, mine included. And we're talking about Jabari Walker with Portland. Portland, obviously, they go on to win the coveted Summer League championship, get the first ever Summer League championship ring. Believe Trendon, if I remember correctly, Trendon Watford was named MVP of that game. But the story here, Jabari Walker, he was fantastic. Really shot the three ball well. Right around 50% or above. Not exactly what exactly it turned out to be after the championship game, but I know he had a double-double, if I'm not mistaken, in that championship game. But did a really good job on the glass, getting offensive rebounds and putbacks. Just stayed engaged. Both ends of the floor, just kept that motor running high. That was probably the most impressive part for me. Was he just kept finding ways to play within himself, but also make things happen. Providing quality help defense, blocking some shots, showing some solid lateral sliding ability, long and athletic guy, enough to impact, and make defensive plays, decent enough handle, comfortable getting to the rim, again, active on the glass. I mean, these are all, he came off very much like the kind of glue guy that could make a playoff roster, like a guy who could get in and just play ball, make a winning play for you, get a rebound, make an open three, whatever it is. When you're a second round guy or even an undrafted guy, like some of these guys we're going to talk about today, these are the things that stand out. And I think Jabari is really going to turn some heads. If Summer League is an indicator of what's coming, I think he's really going to turn some heads and make people wonder why he wasn't considered as a first-round pick and potentially, have some teams thinking to themselves, man, we had a couple cracks at getting this guy and we just, we missed. And that happens. I mean, every draft's going to produce, a couple guys where you're just like, damn, where were we on this guy, And everybody will say, well, he was next on our board. But, I mean, literally, I think Jabari was picked 57th. So any team, it was 58 picks this year because 2 picks were forfeited. So anybody who was saying that, well, Jabari was next on our list, yeah, bullshit. I mean, there's literally 1 pick left after him. So if he turns out to be, a guy that looks like should have been a first-round pick, there's definitely some teams that need to do some explaining. I mean, again, you're talking about a guy who could guard a couple different positions for sure. Again, stretch the floor, help you on the glass. I mean, again, just make some winning basketball plays. And he was one of the guys for me that really I walked away from Summer League thinking like, yeah, I mean, I even should have been higher on him, potentially. Obviously he has the pedigree with his dad, Samaki, who, was a lottery pick, at his time in the league. And so, bottom line, I mean, I just thought he played a hell of a Summer League for sure. All right, so going from Jabari over to Christian Braun, he kind of reminded me of, and again, you guys know I don't really care for, if you've listened to me enough, I don't really care for any sort of comparison. So when I make them, I feel pretty good about it, but also take it with a grain of salt in that sometimes I'll see things and I'll just think that, oh, that reminds me of such and such. And I'll have a couple of those during this podcast. But Christian Braun kind of reminded me of kind of a when I say this, I don't want it to come off negative, a lower kind of level of what Luke Kennard looked like he could potentially be coming out of Duke. And when I say that, I mean this. Like, Luke Kennard, to me, obviously, had the pedigree coming out of high school as a scorer, could shoot the ball, could attack closeouts with a pull-up jump shot, but also could operate as a passer in the pick and roll and showed some aptitude there. Christian Braun isn't the shooter that Kennard is, and but I think Braun is a better athlete. But there is some secondary playmaker, of capability for the second unit for what Christian can bring. His shot falling from three is ultimately what's going to, help his trajectory longer term. But he looked comfortable, or at least, felt comfortable from the looks of things, initiating offense, looking to get guys involved. Nothing, too high level as far as playmaking, the perimeter shot obviously left a lot to be desired. The numbers weren't great. But if you watched him at all in college, you know that there's definitely some better days ahead as far as, what he can do in terms of, scoring from deep. I just kind of reminded, being kind of in that Luke Kennard orbit. I don't know if he'll ever be the shooter that, Luke is, but being within that orbit, meaning here's the player archetype that, the player type that you can be, and you're somewhere in that orbit. Some guys are going to be closer to a player comp than others, but ultimately that kind of a role where you can, be a perimeter scoring threat, over the long term. Again, the shooting splits weren't great from three. I get that, but I think he'll ultimately at least get to league average, or if not maybe slightly above, from three, and then having that confidence and that to initiate offense and play some of the pick and roll and whatnot, and he's just dialed in on both ends. So I don't know. I was a little surprised that he went first round, but, developed out. Can he eventually, how close into that Luke Kennard kind of orbit can he get? And that's ultimately, the shot's a big part of that when you talk about Luke and what he's been throughout his career. So we'll see what the shot evolves into. But there was definitely some parts and pieces that kind of gave me that, I think he can kind of fit in that realm somehow, some way. Maybe not as good as Luke in terms of how he fills that role, but again, somewhere in that orbit. At least that's what was my initial thought watching him play. All right, a couple of you asked about Moussa Diabate. Look, obviously Moussa's got the pedigree as a 5-star prospect, coming out of Michigan. As far as what was shown on the court, you see some of the drop step spins and the brief ability to shoot, like a corner three here, running the floor, did a really good job on the offensive glass. I think averaged about 4.5 offensive rebounds in his first 2 summer league games. Does a good job of, keeping rebounds alive and just kind of staying active and after it. how much of a shot blocker and rim protector is he at the NBA level? What does he necessarily do that's NBA level? That would be a long-term fit somewhere on a roster. Lateral quicks were okay, nothing great. Players that, players can kind of play through his thinner frame, and when they're looking to drive and whatnot. So there was definitely some encouraging signs. He was certainly active out on the floor. He didn't look lost. He was trying to, play his game. And again, there's a lot of guys who can get lost in the sauce a little bit, and I didn't think that was the case for Musa. It's just as I'm watching him play, I'm thinking like, what ultimately does he do that is NBA level? I liked probably the most that I liked out of him was what I saw of his impact on the glass, or what he was trying to do there. But nothing in terms of shot blocking and rim protecting was really super NBA high level or anything of that nature. Obviously has solid athleticism and can play in the dunker spots and be a little bit more of a kind of a vertical spacer type. But again, wasn't really anything that I was like over the moon about. We'll see, how his shot evolves, or how it can, grow from this point. So we'll see. For me, there's going to be a number of these guys that are kind of wait and see. Some guys are really going to show you something in summer league, and then things kind of regress back to reality. And you may see it like right away, like we did with Jaden Hardy, and you may, see these guys in the G League in a couple, some months from now. And, some of the projections or some of the trajectory that you thought you had in mind for some of these guys, kind of comes back down to earth a little bit. So, we'll see. All right, so going from Musa to J.D. Davison, you could certainly argue that J.D. Was certainly one of the better passers in the summer league. Shot it pretty well from three as well. Average he had 44 assists to 15 turnovers in 5 summer league games. So that's a 3-to-1 average. Yeah, I know it's not a perfect 3-to-1 average, but you get my point. 44 to 15. It's really good. I love that he was looking to push the pace with his speed. Obviously, we know the speed and athleticism for JD has been well documented. The athleticism, has been well documented from back in his high school days with the mixtapes and all that sort of thing. But in terms of NBA, it's pushing the pace with his speed, looking to advance the basketball, get guys involved, really probing and looking to drive and kick. Was able to, create defensive plays. Average 2.4 steals plus blocks in 5 summer league games. I'm not going to say stocks like some people say, but steals plus blocks, 2.4 average in 5 summer league games. So there's some of the defensive playmaking ability. He's one of these guys that to me, kind of does the fly around thing where he's looking to make plays, not necessarily be technically sound in terms of getting on the stance and sliding, but being a guy who can dig down, get steals, and create transition opportunities and that sort of thing. For me, again, a lot of the technique side of things, not always being in a stance, not necessarily looking like a guy that wants to get down in the stance, routinely playing under screens. His turnovers were typically, ball handling issues that were unforced, leaving his feet to, make passing decisions. Some of these, obviously some of these things will certainly be cleaned up. But again, the big shining spot for JD was ultimately his ability to get guys involved. And, a 3-to-1 assist to turnover ratio is nothing to scoff at. That's really good. And, so you like that. And then, of course, again, it was encouraging to see what he shot from 3. So I definitely think his speed, playing in NBA spacing can certainly help. And I think, obviously from hearing some of his thoughts on, why he wanted to play in the NBA, the spacing obviously was a big reason why. So ultimately, if this guy can, be somebody who can take his speed, kind of hone it in and find ways to create for others while knocking down his open shots, there's something there for sure. But there's really, I mean, you could certainly make the argument that, he proved to be, certainly one of the better passers in the summer league. You clean up some things here and there, and there's definitely some encouragement. I mean, again, this is a guy with pedigree, another 5-star guy who, some time ago for this draft class was projected to be pretty high, and didn't have the kind of season. Again, this is kind of a running theme for a number of guys that didn't necessarily have the season that you would have hoped for at Alabama. A lot of flashes, in terms of what his upside could be, but ultimately, again, the NBA to me is trying to find your spot, but more so trying to take what you're really good at or what you could be really good at and accentuating it. And so if JD can be a guy who can make open threes, to a certain degree, but also can get guys involved and use his speed to kind of provide a change of pace in your second unit, I think there's value there for sure. All right, so going from JD to one of the Laker darlings, talking about Cole Swider. Look, Cole shot the hell out of it. There's not going to be too many guys that you can say shot better or on the level with what Cole Swider did in the summer league. He showed to be a high-level floor spacer. Great repeatable shot stroke, 28 of 52 from 3 in 8 summer league games. That goes all the way back to the California Classic. Basically shooting 53.8% from 3 while averaging just over 13 points, or just under 14 points, I should say, per game in the summer league. Has a quick release, gathered, keeps himself on balance when he needs to reset, able to get himself back under balance and gathered. Obviously this is a team in Los Angeles that needs shooting, sorely needs it. And giving a guy like that some additional floor spacing to get his shot off, certainly will be of help. And if, clearly he's not going to shoot that high of a level in the NBA, but again, if this can be a guy that long-term can get you 38, 39% from 3 and can provide some quality off-the-bench shooting, you'll take it, especially for a guy that went undrafted. Some of the stop and pop stuff in the mid-range wasn't always great, but it's there. Athleticism leaves, quite a bit to be desired. So how well does he ultimately finish around NBA size and length? He was okay in summer league. Only 5 assists in 8 summer league games. What does he do once you run him off his 3-point spot? What's kind of next? In other words, the footwork on closeouts on defense need work. He's not, anything great sliding laterally, and these are things that were said about him even going back to high school. He's all right in terms of defense, but it's not going to be anything that's going to keep him on the floor. Ultimately, it's going to be a shooting that keeps him on the floor. So, you want to kind of see what the maturation in his offensive game is, run off the 3-point line, being able to reliably find spots on the floor where you can stop and pop, or eventually evolve in your playmaking, for other guys. So yeah, we'll kind of see where he evolves, but ultimately the 3-point shooting is a big sticking point for a lot of teams. They need guys who can spread the floor, and a guy like Cole Swider is welcome in this league. So, we'll see. Cole Swider, from him as a shot maker to another shot maker in Malachi Branham. Look, let me tell you something. We mentioned Jabari Walker kind of opening up some eyes for me personally. Some of you out there were high on Branham. I was not one of those guys. Not that I didn't have any value on him, but I just, I wasn't as high as others that were probably looking at him in a different light than I was. But I'll say this, again, having that buffer of summer league, this is where you kind of see some other things for guys who are like, okay, I see it. So to me, this is going to be another one of these spots where I make a guy in the orbit kind of conversation or comparison. Branham averaging about 15 a game, 40% from 3 and 5 summer league games. Again, one of these guys that really grew on me during summer league. Kind of, in a way, reminded me was in kind of the orbit of a Desmond Bane. Again, not saying he's going to be Desmond Bane, just saying in the orbit. If Desmond Bane is here in the center, how close is he to being kind of in that role as a floor spacer, as a guy that, can shot make? One of the things that you like about Desmond Bane is not just his ability to shoot the three, but kind of shoot the pull-ups once he's chased off the three-point line, but also has enough size and strength, to get to the rim. Branham is probably about 15 to 20 pounds or so lighter, but both are guys are 6'5". Both are strong for what their bodies are. Obviously, Desmond, more so. But Branham just did a good job in terms of just shot making. I mean, that's what he was drafted for. But to me, he kind of reminded me of being kind of in that Desmond Bane kind of orbit. Again, not saying he becomes that. I'm just saying he's kind of in that orbit. If you go and watch Desmond Bane film, which I did, just to kind of reaffirm kind of what I thought I was seeing and compare it to what some of the things you see Malachi Branham do, there's something there. So I'm just saying in kind of that orbit. So before you kill me, just, again, watch some of the film and just kind of get an idea for what kind of, trajectory to some degree Malachi Branham can have. And I think anybody who's high on him may hear that and think, that's actually not bad. Maybe some of you love it, like it, don't like it, I don't know. But to me, it made sense. Neither guy is, crazy high-level athlete, but they're better athletically than what they look in some cases. I don't know. I really felt good about Branham's shot making for sure. Bane is definitely more of a natural passer, good pick and roll passer, can kind of operate in that way. Branham has some of that, but it's not to the level of what Bane would be. I don't think either one of these guys leaves a lot to be desired defensively. I think there was, a decent amount said about what Bane could be defensively. I don't know he's necessarily been that game in and game out for Memphis. And I don't necessarily see Branham having a high defensive ceiling in and of himself. So I think where the comparisons or where the orbit conversation would be in this case would be kind of, how does he fit in the way in which Desmond Bane could? Again, spreading the floor, getting run off the three-point line, being able to shoot the pull-up, getting to the rim at times and finishing, maybe playing some of that pick-and-roll passer ability here and there. I just think Branham kind of reminds me now that I've seen him in Summer League kind of in that orbit. Again, not an exact comp or an exact comparison, but in kind of that orbit. Defensively, I didn't sound too cheerful about either guy. I will say that I do like Bane in terms of I feel like he's got some good hands and anticipations to create steals and dig down opportunities, and I saw some of that from Branham as well. So there's some similarity there as well. Again, like it, love it, whatever you think of the orbit conversation of what I'm saying about some of these guys, but this is me watching guys trying to figure out, what's ultimately some of the trajectory of what guys can, what role guys can play. And that's, as I was watching him more in Summer League, that's kind of the role, probably to a lesser degree, that I think, he can play. I mean, Bane, I think, is certainly really played at a pretty high level, given what his initial trajectory was in terms of a guy who can spread the floor. I think he's certainly gone above and beyond that for sure. So we'll see if Branham can kind of follow in those footsteps to some degree. All right, so moving on from Malachi Branham to another LA Laker darling, this time another undrafted player, in Scottie Pippen Jr. Listen, really nothing scoring-wise or shooting-wise was great. He certainly had some really, good moments in terms of, pulling up in the mid-range, from the nail, elbow, pull-up type stuff. So he's definitely comfortable in those ways, but doesn't really have the size, the length, or the athleticism to be a high-level finisher, I don't think, necessarily in the NBA. But I don't think that's necessarily where you're expecting his value to ultimately be. I think, certainly he can come in, play with pace, get guys involved, and, find guys, just be able to kind of initiate the offense, create for guys. The turnovers were a touch too high here and there. But overall, I thought he did well with the basketball and just kind of understood his role out on the floor, played within himself. Defensively wasn't a whole lot to be super excited about, but, has good hands, creates some deflections and steals here and there. Physical, size to contest, and guard NBA guards is going to be a bit of an issue, but for the most part, again, I think is a guy that, as his game evolves, he's got some of the floater stuff. Again, his mid-range, there's definitely some things to like. Beyond that, finishing at the rim and the three-point shooting, he shot, I think, 6 from 27 from 3. So the three-point shot is going to need some time and reps, and I don't know if he ever becomes anything too serviceable as a finisher at the rim. But again, getting to a point where he can make threes at a higher clip, and also be a guy who can kind of come in, take care of the basketball, initiate the offense, run a second unit. There's some possibilities there, and obviously he had some decent scoring games and just overall production. Got some fans excited, or to some degree. So there's definitely some of that, that can be something you keep an eye on as he makes his way into the G League and kind of see what, how his game grows and evolves. All right, going from Scotty to Tyrese Martin, playing for the Atlanta Hawks. I thought Tyrese Martin, showed some really good scoring ability. Not a highly efficient guy as far as shooting, shot like around 35% from 3. But, in his last 3 Summer League games, had 55 points, about an 18-point per game average there. 2 of those games were 20-plus points. I think both of them actually were 21 in those 2 performances. He was another guy like Darius Days, made his way from Portsmouth to the Combine, into the Summer League. I would say, he certainly wanted and needed the ball in his hands. It was more like, I can bring the ball up, I can create for myself, I can, pull up in the mid-range, I can, shoot some threes off the catch, create my own three. I thought where he had a pretty good, did a good job of excelling more so was in transition. And there's definitely some areas in the mid-range where he clearly works on. He's got some, floater game. He's got some, shots off of 1 foot in the mid-range game where he's comfortable taking some of the pull-up stuff. Again, comfortable in handling the ball, has some decent skill. There's nothing he does great. Like if he shot 38, 39, maybe 40% from 3, maybe I feel a little more comfortable. But wasn't anything in the shooting split that made me feel great. I will say that the confidence just to be able to take and create his shot was encouraging. You obviously, if you've seen him play at UConn, you definitely saw that in his game. Again, where I think he shined best in terms of scoring was in transition. The shot selection and the passing, left a lot to be desired. He can certainly find guys, but he can also certainly have a lot of tunnel vision that led to him taking some tougher shots. He's not necessarily a blow-by guy. Most of his best passes are more of guys cutting in front of him. So things that are happening in front of him, he could kind of manipulate and create for, show a solid feel there. But there wasn't anything that was like high level in terms of, I think he had one pass where it was kind of like a wraparound baseline pass where I really thought that there was some potential, there. But, most of it was simple read and reaction type stuff. But I mean, ultimately, this is a league of wings, and he's shown the confidence to come in and score. He's got the positional size. If he can get his 3 ball to drop at a higher clip over time, get more of his handle to kind of be a little more tighter, advance some of his his playmaking ability for others, and just kind of have kind of that next step in his game, there might be some opportunities for him. It's part of the reason why I, to be honest, why I created a draft video for him, because, there's a lot of guys that, that I thought were going to go undrafted. Tyrese ended up not being one of them. He actually did get drafted. But, there were a handful of guys that I thought might go undrafted, him included, that I was like, let me make sure I have some videos up, because some of these guys I think, might have an opportunity, to show some things. And certainly I think Tyrese did that. I think he did himself some solid favors. Let me see if there's anything here in terms of, let me see, Tyrese Martin. Let's see if there's any news on him. Yeah, so it looks like he did get a 2-way contract. Let me make sure. Let me make sure I get that correct. Tyrese Martin, 2-way. Okay. Oh, it's a multi-year contract. Cool. All right, let's see what this is. Again, any news that's happened over the last couple of days in terms of signings, because I've been watching so much other basketball, some of this stuff has kind of escaped me. All right, this morning, July 16th, the Atlanta Hawks announced the team has signed Tyrese Martin, the number 51 overall pick in the 2022 NBA draft, to a multi-year contract. Terms were not disclosed on the deal, but hey, that's great. Multi-year deal. Again, this is where, if you're willing to go through the draft process and really knock it out, you see what you see with Darius getting the 2-way. Now you're seeing what you're seeing with Tyrese getting a multi-year deal. And both played their way into it. Both played well in Portsmouth. Both did their thing more or less in the combine, came in the summer league and rinse and repeat. Played their game. So good for him. All right. It's going from Tyrese Martin. All right. Last guy I think I'll go over, Bryce McGowens. This was a guy, Bryce was a guy, coming out of Nebraska that I thought, in terms of a second round guy, potential second round guy that I thought had some first round value in terms of what he can do in terms of scoring and shot creation. The shooting splits weren't great in terms of overall, but in terms of his ability to create his own three, he went 12 of 28 from three, 42.8% at summer league from three. Struggled to score at the rim, but there's a smooth pace in which he plays with. Again, another guy who kind of like wants the ball in his hands, much like we just mentioned with Tyrese Martin, where he can kind of be, a longer, wiry, rangy kind of wing. But he's certainly more comfortable from watching the film in terms of being able to create his own shot. Not necessarily a guy who necessarily not necessarily a guy who, you just want to stick in the corner. I think sometimes there's going to be opportunities where you can give him the basketball and he can, kind of create some of his own threes. And there's certainly proof on the film from Summer League that he has a high skill level to do that. For me, he tended to settle for jumpers at times. Isn't a huge space creator. Shows some solid handle. A lot of the turnovers in which he had were either handle related, loose handle, reckless handle to a degree. Poor decisions with passes, forcing passes. So there's definitely areas within there that can obviously be cleaned up. Again, I mentioned, the not being so great at finishing at the rim. I think for me, what I liked about him while he was at Nebraska, and I think what a lot of people who were high on him is we'll call it a sleeper, was the fact that he's just comfortable operating with the ball in his hands, creating his own shot. And you think about guys who are comfortable doing that, and you give them NBA spacing, and things start to open up for him. And again, I think the most encouraging part was what he could do creating his own three. I mean, he's got a smooth-looking shot, and so there's opportunities there for him to stretch the floor, but also create a shot beyond the arc. Did a good job on the glass, averaged around 4 rebounds per game in the summer league. Showed some decent flashes of playing in the pick and roll as a passer. Advancing the basketball to open shooters, a lot of simple read, type passes. Defensive stance was inconsistent, opens up his hips too early on drives, gives up a little too easy at times for me. Lateral quickness was decent, but nothing, anything great. Struggled to get skinny, too many times through screens. Wasn't anything defensively that I saw that was great. Wasn't like he averaged anything in terms of playmaking, defensive playmaking with blocks or rebounds that were overly encouraging on that end either. So I think where you kind of start and evolve with him is, as a shot maker and, getting him stronger, but then also getting him to play through contact, but then, getting him comfortable to do more mid-range pull-up stuff, which he can do. He's got some of the floater stuff, so there's some opportunities there where, he doesn't necessarily have to get to the rim in order to make plays as a scorer. But certainly, creating his own three-point shot off the bounce was really encouraging. Again, the shooting numbers from 3, 12 from 28, basically just under 43%. That's certainly encouraging. So, for anybody who was high on Bryce as a kind of a second-round guy, myself included, there was certainly some flashes there, but maybe not as much as you'd hoped. I mean, he had one game, I think, where he went 7 of 10 from the field, and I think that was kind of the game. People kind of buzzed about him a little bit as far as his production, but from that point forward, he didn't really have any great shooting games. I think he even had a game where I think he went 2 for 14 or 2 from 12 or something like that. So, again, it's these are things that will evolve over time, but you like the confidence he has. You like the fact that, again, he can, create from the perimeter as a three-point shooter. So we'll see where it goes from there. All right. That's pretty much all the guys I really want to discuss. If there's anybody else I would have missed that you really wanted me to touch on, and, if there's enough guys or enough requests for it, maybe I do a part 3 to, maybe discuss another handful of guys. But I think at this point I've probably talked about somewhere in the range of 35 or so-ish guys between first round, second round, and undrafted. And I think I've pretty much covered the majority of the high points. I don't really think I've missed much. And again, this is just 2022 NBA draft. I'm not talking second-year guys, third-year guys, whatever. This is all just the 2022 draft class, so don't listen to these thinking I just completely neglected any of the second-year guys or anything like that. Obviously, there were some amazing performances from second-year guys that could certainly be talked about at length. But this is just the 2022 draft class, and so if there's anybody I missed that you absolutely want me to talk on, maybe if there's enough of a request for it, again, maybe I'll do a part 3. Or maybe I'll just include it as kind of a segment in another podcast episode. But let me know your thoughts of this episode and last episode. Again, before you go saying I didn't mention a guy, make sure you listen to part 1 as you finish listening to part 2. And, just let me know what you think of the overall content. Definitely interested to get your feedback. If you are listening, which obviously if you're hearing this, you are, please make sure to rate the podcast. If you're listening to it on Apple, rate it on Apple. If you're listening to it on Spotify, rate and subscribe there as well. Wherever you're hearing this at, make sure you're subscribing, rating, and give constructive criticism. You don't give me this bullshit of, well, he didn't give me all the analytical data. It's like, listen, bro, I don't have enough time to do that for everybody. If I'm going to sit here and talk about, 20 to 30 guys, I can't give you every little statistical breakdown that there is. And to be honest with you, I don't really have the time to go through. I'm going to watch a lot of film, take notes, and kind of give it to you guys raw and kind of how I see it. Am I going to be right about everybody? No. Is my analysis going to be something you're always going to agree with? No. But ultimately, I'm here to talk basketball as best I can with you guys and to just give you some feedback on what I'm seeing and, create a discourse. So hopefully you're enjoying the content. Let me know, by subscribing or leaving some comments on the YouTube. If you're not subscribed to the YouTube channel, it's Hardwood Hoop Central NBA Draft Green Room. Yes, it's a mouthful, but look it up there, and you'll see our draft content that we've put up there for this season. So if there's any guys you want to go back and watch film on, there's certainly plenty there. I did something like around 70, 75 guys this year, so you should be able to, to get all your film needs. I missed maybe 5 guys that had their name called on draft night, so maybe not everybody, but for the most part, you're going to get most everybody. So anyway, again, let me know how you feel about the content, and that'll be it for this episode. Thank you so much for listening, especially if you've listened all the way to this point, and if you've continued to follow, truly appreciate it, and we will see you next time on the next episode of the Prospect Pod. Take care.